We'll get started.
Go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to StartOut Summit Session 4, How Fund Managers, LPs Can Best Support DEI and Underrepresented Founders. My name is Ureeka, and I will be your chat moderator for the session. We're so excited to have everybody here today. We have a moderator, which will be Candice Morgan. We have 3 panelists, Cheryl Contee, Melissa Bradley, and Melissa Moore. Welcome. Moderator, I'll turn it over to you, Candice.
Great. And just a quick question, is Solomon on as well? Solomon Acosta? I'm not sure if you see the emails, info@Zyon. Okay. We'll get started and see if Solomon hops on. Solomon, if you are there, just like throw a note into the chat. Good afternoon, good morning for those wherever you are across the globe. I'm really excited to be your moderator today. As Ureeka said, my name is Candice Morgan, and I lead equity, diversity, inclusion at Google Ventures, now GV, and I've been in D&I work for 15 years. Previously as at Pinterest, where I led this work for 4 years and did diversity consulting at Catalyst for a decade before that. I have some amazing panelists who I'm going to let introduce themselves to get kicked off. But this session is going to really help us think about the ecosystem of venture capital and how fund managers, how LPs, and how entrepreneurs can all work to create a more inclusive DEI ecosystem in venture. As someone who's been in venture for a little under a year, it's been a really fascinating onboarding experience for me. It's been the year of 2020 though, so I feel like I learned quite a bit. So let's get started. I'm going to turn a question over to our panelists. And the first thing that I want to ask all of you is to tell us just, your name, what you're working on right now, just kind of briefly. And then more importantly, why did you feel that this conversation was important? Why did you choose this topic to talk about today? How about, let's start with Melissa Bradley.
Awesome. Well, pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So as you mentioned, my name is Melissa Bradley, and I am a founder of 1863 Ventures and general partner at 1863 Venture Fund. And so, part of this work for me is both personal and I would say market driven. So having been a serial entrepreneur and hearing way too many times that they didn't believe that I could do what I could do, they didn't believe in the target market. My focus has always been Black and brown entrepreneurs. It became really important that I could hopefully reduce some of that friction that other entrepreneurs behind me experience by providing the kind of inside the black box, what happens, but also being mindful of where areas that we just need help in to make sure that if we cannot change the color that we are, the gender that we are, orientation, our businesses are airtight, hence the creation of the accelerator. What we realized is though, it still wasn't happening. There was still this aspect of getting investment that we have an amazing sense of social capital in the Black community and the brown community, but it's different. When I didn't meet a Black CEO in my life till I sold my first company, and I was like, boy, I wish I had known you 3 years when I first started. So I think reducing that social friction has been challenging. And so I said, well, let's go ahead and start a fund, and it was not our plan. This would be my third fund. But it was done really out of market opportunity. And that is that, the personal is I don't want anybody to ever experience what I experienced, which is people telling me no because I was Black, I was a woman, and I was going into finance. But the market opportunity speaks to a much bigger gap that needs to be filled, with African-American women being the fastest growing entrepreneurs in this country, a probably near 40% decline in white men starting businesses, Latinx businesses being the fastest growing businesses, and particularly the Black and brown communities, also the largest job creators. So why are we not investing in them if we actually give a hoot about our country? And so we talk about security, we talk about all kinds of other stuff. I believe that investing in what I call the new majority is the only way to really course correct our economy in terms of job creation and GDP. So that's why I got into this.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to get into a little bit about your book and some learnings that we can garner from you. Let me turn to Cheryl. Cheryl, do you want to introduce what you're working on now and why you decided to join today?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Candice. And thanks for all of you, for joining. The reason I wanted to be here today is because I want to partner with other people who understand that DEI is not just a moral imperative, but as Melisssa said, it's an economic imperative. Like this is, how we actually broaden economic success, for the nation as a whole. So it's not just a nice to have. All of the studies show that when you have diverse teams, you are more productive and more profitable, just how you make more money. But who am I? I'm Cheryl Contee. I'm the CEO of Do Big Things. Do Big Things is a digital agency that partners with the leading causes, campaigns, and candidates and corporations around the world for the new narrative and new tech that we need in the new world we live in today. I am also known as the co-founder of Attentively. Attentively was influencer marketing and marketing automation software geared towards the causes and campaigns market. It actually became the first tech startup founded by a Black woman to be acquired by a NASDAQ company. And what I love about that story is that it was an impact startup that was acquired by an impact company. As a result of that experience, I wrote Mechanical Bull, How You Can Achieve Startup Success. It became an Amazon bestseller in quite a few categories. And, I recommend it to all of you because there's actually a lot of investor information in there. I think that there are a lot of investors, just like each of you, and fund managers, et cetera, who see, what we see, that, there are special challenges, for female-run companies, for Black and Brown founded companies. And so, every chapter has a little bit of an investor insight, which is, hey, if you're trying to support these companies, here's something you might not know about what the challenge that this company is experiencing at this life cycle that might be different, from some of the white founded companies. And here's what you can do as a fund manager, as a VC, as an investor to support them.
That is fantastic. And I just dropped your book, the link for your book in the chat. I think that's, again, going to be a huge part of our conversation. What's been clear is that who you are does matter and does impact both from a positive standpoint in terms of diverse teams, but also from a challenging standpoint when you're trying to raise, and there aren't a lot of people that look like you.
Well, exactly. And one last thing, I've also been deepening my relationship with the Impact Seat, which was founded by Barbara Clark, who is one of the most prolific angel investors focused on innovative startups founded by women of color. And so, I'll be talking more about that in 2020, but just want to give her a shout out as she's a real thought leader in this space of DEI and impact investing.
Impact Seat, excellent. Great. So Melissa Moore, could you go ahead and tell us what you're working on right now and why you decided to join today?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am so honored to be here. Very excited to meet you all. And I'm honored to be on this panel with Candice, Melissa, and Cheryl. I have been a longtime community builder based in San Francisco. I've been a serial founder, investor, and now I'm actually an operator. So in my full-time capacity, I run Series A+ founder programs for AllRaise. AllRaise is a nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the success of female founders and funders. As my weekend hustle, I do invest. I'm an investment partner at the Community Fund, which is a $5 million fund that invests in community-driven companies. Our GP and co-founder Lolita Taub actually spoke, I think, just an hour ago. So if you were in that panel, you may have heard about the Community Fund. I'm also a first-generation Filipino-American immigrant. I'm super passionate about supporting more women and underrepresented founders. I was previously trying to raise a fund about a year ago. So I'm really here to share more about my experiences and help other people who are interested in raising a fund or investing learn more based on what I know now.
Awesome. I think everyone can agree we have a very super informative group and panel. And we're going to get pretty deep into some of these questions. And once again, Solomon, if you're on, just pop a note in the chat, and we'll have you jump in. So let me go into our first question, which is just getting into this industry, like, learning about venture as an industry. I mentioned I'm fairly new to the industry, although I came from a venture-backed startup, went through an IPO, et cetera, et cetera. Even then, it's a very different perspective. So, we've talked about how challenging it is to see people that look like you, particularly in this industry. We've looked at the statistics, we read the data, we see who gets funded, right? 2% and 1% and 3%, et cetera, respectively, of Black and Latin American founders. And so I'm curious, as you're building a company, especially for some of our early, small, just emerging startups, you do have to think about culture. We talked a lot about culture. How did you get into this industry, and how do you bring other people along into the industry that don't necessarily look like the status quo? And just to throw a stat out there that I'll also drop in the chat box, Richard Kirby, when he was at Bedrock, did some research and found that 40% of investors went to 2 schools. And for Black investors, 50% of them went to the same 2 schools. So how do you break in? How does this start? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's not easy, and I think that's one reason you often see that, female founders or Black and brown founders are often older. They're not, the sort of stereotypical, 24-year-old, chugging down Red Bull, with the cans on their ears, pounding around on a keyboard. They're often older and more established because it's taken them time to build a network, such that they could get funded, and build that team. It has taken time for them to even learn that this is possible. For a lot of families, I know certainly mine, the dream for my parents was for me to become a doctor. They were educators, and, there's, I think for a lot of Black and brown families, if someone shows promise early, people say, well, you should be a doctor or a lawyer or maybe an engineer. Becoming an entrepreneur is often not seen as a safe and, lucrative and respected, proposition. It sounds risky, even though, it may not be. It is a way to advance. And so, I do think that, that is a challenge, and something that, I think that, the folks on this call can help with in terms of sharing more, popularizing, socializing the concept, that this is possible. You can have a great idea that solves an important problem for a community, a product or a service, and that you can get funding, to support that. That's a new idea for most people, right? And then, I also think, in terms of how I got started, it was by seeing peers of mine. It was by seeing peers of mine launching companies and saying, well, that guy, and they were, looking back, they were all white guys, but they were friends. That guy's not smarter than me. I know I have good ideas, but, my journey to getting, building the product and getting funded looked very different, than theirs.
Cheryl, that reminds me of, you're reminding me of Michelle Obama and how she talked about, getting into rooms and, where there was no one that looked like her, and realizing, like, it's not rocket science. Like, these people aren't all that smart. I can do this too. It's great.
Yeah, I would say, I got into this because, one, I was sick and tired of corporate America. I had a corporate job, and I was literally told I would not advance unless somebody died or left the company. Talk about demotivating someone who was a year out of school. And then I also looked around and realized that in order to have the lifestyle that I wanted, but more important, the impact that I wanted, I couldn't find any other companies. And so it was extremely important that I said, let me try this myself. And then the final thing, I think, because I am highly competitive, I was like, well, some of these folks can do it who I know. And I go, there's no reason why I can't do it. Not good, not bad, just interesting. And so that was really the motivation. And I would say the challenge, though, was there was not a lot of precedent before me. And so I am thrilled and overjoyed with the stories that are coming out. I mean, it's unfortunate that that last story was still everybody who got on one, or I guess 2 pages of a magazine. I hope that we actually fill an entire magazine at some point. But I think it's also motivating as I meet other folks who are coming along and starting their companies that there's somebody to see. When I started my first company, there was really no one to see. There were tons of corporate executives in financial services who were relatively high ranking, but there was no one who had jumped out there. And dare I say, there's also something to be said about the various sectors that we go into. I think there are some natural sectors. I run into a lot of healthcare, beauty, beauty tech or health tech, personal goods, food that are run and dominated, I would say, by women of color. But you start talking about fintech, you start talking about hardcore health tech, you don't see that. And so, I hope that this is an opportunity to one, show that it's possible, whatever your motivation, and two, that even if somebody's not there, I'd say we are in a unique moment, if not movement, that says the aperture is opening even on some of those traditionally locked or underrepresented industries.
Yes, 100%. I grew up in New York City on the East Coast, and where you went was finance or medicine, right? And that was or law, and those were the pinnacles. And moving out to San Francisco, I was like, I had friends and colleagues and employees who were going to be an entrepreneur when they were in, middle school. So I think that's an important element. Melissa, let me ask you, as someone who is, has been focused on many aspects as an operator, as fund manager, as an investor, Melissa Moore, let me ask you about, how you got into this industry.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of women and underrepresented people have recently started spinning out their own funds because we were not given the opportunity to join a more institutional fund in a check writing role. So I've talked to other GPs and emerging fund managers who have said they had to start their own because they were given the women job. And I'm just putting this in quotation mark because there is no such thing as a woman job, but they were non-check writing roles. And so I think that for VC funds, if you are in a position to do this, you should be able to create, I would hope they could create a scout program of some sort, or an operator in residence / investor in residence program, or even spinning out a separate fund that's for emerging fund managers, because venture capital is so much about track record. And the hard part is we can't have a track record if we're not given the opportunity to invest. So it goes back to this whole catch-22. Most of us are not independently wealthy, so we can't angel invest on our own. So that actually prevents us from starting really to be able to raise a fund or to start, angel investing, period. And so I think there are some funds who are leading the way on how to do this. I was really excited about 776, which is a new fund led by Alexis Ohanian and Caitlin Holloway. And they just announced this week an operator in residence program where they're seeking 3 experienced operators who want to break into VCs. And it's so, because of how difficult it is to break into VC, like you have to actually create a separate program like that. I think the community fund has also done really well in recruiting an investment team that is, most of us have full-time roles in our day jobs, but we're all very passionate about investing, and they saw the potential in getting these operators or founders to start writing checks from our own networks and community. And this is the goal for the community fund is really to help us build a track record. So then when we start raising again, or when we start applying for full-time roles at venture capital firms, we actually have the track record that qualifies us for the position.
Yeah, I think that's, the track record, having certain backers and having certain relationships is so important. Obviously having role models, which we've talked about, but also relationships. And, Rock Health just put out a study, which I'll throw in the chat. I seem to be fond of doing so. But they, talking about diversity, they've done a number of gender equity studies, but they recently did a study on health tech, specifically on digital health. And the 2 biggest barriers that underrepresented both executives and founders reported were, relationships and access to capital. Which is very aligned with what we're talking about. I want to jump into the founder perspective for just a second, because a number of you talked about or emerging fund manager perspective, right? Anyone who is trying to raise. And my question is like, what type of support are diverse founding teams, underrepresented fund managers looking for? What sort of differences have you all encountered in raising? Because I can imagine there's this, experience of learning about what you want to do and build your own thing. And then that realization or that moment when your experience differs from that of, maybe some of your white male friends. So can we talk a little bit about that? What type of support would be needed and what sort of barriers did you encounter?
I would say the biggest barrier is lack of precedent. I've had people say, I don't know any other Black people. I don't know Black people who've done this before. Is there really a market there? And a lot of that is I'd say ignorance with a small I as opposed to the big I, because there has not been a lot of data around what our capacity and power is. There's tons of data out there about the purchasing power of African Americans, but not about the entrepreneurial power or the investment power. I like you came from New York. And so investing is just in your blood, right? When you come from Queens and Harlem, you've got something to prove. And so, I think from a fund perspective, I see all the time, like, well, how do you know your entrepreneurs are going to be able to pay you back? How do you know that they're going to be ready? And I dare say we suffer a slight different hardship on the fund side because we not only do equity, but we do revenue-based financing. And Jewel and I have had this conversation, those of us who are trying to have funds that are not just equity-based, how do we convince folks that we're going to get our money back? And my counter has been less than 20% of all current companies that are Black are not tech. And so how do we help the entrepreneurs who are the primary breadwinners and the primary employment creators? And so I think it's almost like trying to get into this exclusive country club, and you have to make sure you have the right shoes, the right shirt, the right language. So it's definitely been challenging. And I think even in this moment, that unfortunately we have now designated as pre-George Floyd and post-George Floyd, I think people are really looking for a copy and paste. And that's concerning because there's a lot of money now being allocated to Black entrepreneurs, but no one really, I love that Cheryl is here, but our pathways and our journeys are so different that you can't just say cut and paste, this product is going to work, these terms are going to work. Heck, this time horizon is going to work. And I did research 2 years ago that said it cost at least $250,000 more for a Black entrepreneur to start the same exact business as their white peer. And that's because of direct and indirect costs. So that alone just talks about different financing, different hurdles. Don't ask me why I haven't contributed more. If I got this far, at least count the $250 that has been both direct and indirect. So I think on a fund side, it's just people are more comfortable with what they see. And also on the entrepreneur side, I don't think it's any different, right? I think it's people are very comfortable with what they see. And again, this lack of research and precedent in certain sectors is really hard. And I think, in the company, we are very clear. Our focus is on entrepreneurs of color. And we've had investors say, well, do they have any money? And I'm going, are we really going to have this conversation today? And so luckily, my co-founder's like, yeah, that's not the kind of person we want to be associated with. But I do think, we have the term mansplaining and whitesplaining. I think there's like Black entrepreneur splaining, right? That because we have not been popular until now, and there have been a lot of one-offs that I think have been able to be easily categorized. We need to respect that we are not a homogenous group, that there is a tremendous amount of diversity within our diversity, and there's a time horizon to be able to understand that. And I recognize that I say that against a industry that is based on speed, accessibility, social networks, and comfort. There is some natural tension there that I think we need to be able to get past.
Just so well said. There are so many gems in what you shared, and that $250,000 stat is super powerful. I think so many decision-making processes are based on, yes, precedent, haven't seen it, and then therefore lack of trust, which is, which I put in the comfort category, amongst other areas. Melisssa, Moore or Cheryl, anything you want to build on the type of barriers that you've seen and support around?
Sure. I would concur with everything that Melisssa said. And it's actually useful to have a number, of what is the cost of being Black and brown? Like, what is it? Just that additional, because then that's something you'd be like, oh, okay, I know I need to raise more money. And look, as a founder, one of the things I do a lot of talking, to other startups and founders. And I say, look, the conventional wisdom is that it takes 6 to 12 months on average, to raise money for your business, and if you are, a woman, or you're Black or brown, or God help you both, you should factor on it taking longer, that it might take you longer, and you're going to have to knock on more doors. I actually, an advisor to, a number of funds, and, one of them, really focused hard on trying to reach, trying to fund Black women, Black and brown women. And they said, look, if we have a white woman, it takes an average of seven contacts, right, to then get a check written. For a Black woman, it takes an average of 50. 50. And that number sounded right to me. I was like, yep, that sounds about right. That I figured out really early on in the process that I was going to have to knock on a lot more doors, and have a lot more doors slammed in my face, than, my white and male counterparts. And I just did the work. I just was like, all right, I'm just going to, hit the pavement. And, I experienced real discrimination where literally, I would do a demo, like it wasn't vaporware. We had like an actual product that had actual customers, and, a person, even though I had, had a national and international reputation, had already built another, company with multi-million dollars in revenue, literally a fund that was dedicated to funding people like me, looked me in the eye, another white guy, and said, this is a really interesting software and I can see how it would be powerful, but I don't know if you are the person who could actually make this happen. And yes, I mean, I think that, Melisssa is 100% correct that, every business is different and it's not, homogenous, and there are a lot of great ideas out there, but that experience of someone literally saying, this is a great idea, but I don't know if you are the person who can make this a reality, was just like, okay, and I just, haters to the left. I was just like, I just didn't waste my time on anyone who was giving me any sort of signal that, they're gonna, they're not gonna do it. But what, so what can fund managers do? And I do talk a lot about this in the book, but, just to condense that, and there's also a Harvard Business Review article that, TLDR, everybody's busy, that's a good synthesis. So look that up. But basically network, right? Like, when you are funding, a Black or brown company or a female founded company, their network is smaller, your network is bigger, right? And so that's something that you can bring to the table, boosting them publicly, right? Like they need a lot, as you've heard, they need a lot more energy. You can dent that $250,000 gap just by creating free publicity for them, right? So are there ways in which you can boost them publicly? Mentorship, like they're coming into this, they didn't grow up with a family friend who's also a senior executive potentially, right? They don't have that in their family potentially. And so, I think that, white people and male people sometimes don't realize, the hidden advantages they have there, where, within even just their family or family friend circle, they have those senior executives, but if you're, an immigrant, whose family owned a dry cleaners, like you don't necessarily have, sort of, people with that, level of financial experience or management experience or HR experience, or marketing experience. So, your mentorship means as much as your money. Right. And then money, like, there is no friends and family fund, like that is just, if you're Black or brown, I'll tell you, I had a friend of mine, who's a great guy, but, I asked him, well, how did you start your business? Very successful business in our space. He was like, oh, well, my grandmother died and left me $600,000. So I quit my job and start I was like, yeah, so if you're Black or brown, the chances of that happening to you are very small. Okay. Like that's not a real thing, and if I went around to my friends, or at least my family, if I went around to my family and said, hey, I've got this startup and, I'd love for you to get a part of it. And, I'm trying to raise some money. I would have ended up with a bunch of people owing me $20. Okay, like I wouldn't have raised any money. You're like, if you're a technologist in particular, you're already making the most in your family if you're Black or brown, right? Just like real talk. So that means you need to, if you believe in this business, you need to understand that they don't have that same depth of resources. to back them. If something goes wrong, like there's not the pool of financial resources is lower. So you need to please, back that up with, hey, here's extra, here's more, rather than less.
Yes. That's so powerful. And I put some of those tips in the chat because I just relate to so much of what you shared. And, in particular, when, I don't know how else to say it, but like sometimes it just hurts more when it comes from your own, like experiencing being written off by people that are trying to support women of color, by other women of color that have internalized, like, okay, I need to go to the person and like kind of see past you. That really hurts. you gotta like take it in, but it hurts. And yeah, same thing. Your family and friends like don't even understand what you do, right? Let alone can they be the fund, because you need to help them. I'm gonna ask one more question to the group, and then we've got some great questions in the chat. So I wanted to ask you, Melissa, a little bit about, you mentioned All Raise and you mentioned Community Fund, and some of the things that the organizations and funds that you work with have done differently. One example is, we recently saw David Swenson announce that Yale is going to require diversity in order to deploy capital, which I think is an amazing way of helping the industry stay accountable. What are some other practices you've learned from the organizations that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think one easy thing that an investor or fund manager can do is that even if your fund doesn't have a diversity mandate, that should not prevent you as the individual to purposefully seek out more diverse founders, right? So we're all in control of the actions that we take. So just because we have no mandate to invest in more women doesn't mean that you can't be an ally and start going to events and trying to be part of groups where it is focused on supporting more women founders or underrepresented founders. So that's just like one easy thing. I think one thing that the community fund has done well, I think I talked about how there's an investment team of 13 partners, and we also do not have a diversity mandate at all. We invest in the best companies, seeking the best partners who are community builders that really have unique deal flow. Traditionally, VC funds have 80% are 80% male and also 79%, or maybe I flipped it around, white. So it's white and male 80%. But the community fund, our stats are really amazing in that we have 31% Asian, 23% white, 23% Latinx, and 23% Black. We're also 46% women and 55% men. And again, because of who we are, we also get to see more diverse deals from our community and our network. So our investment team is across the US. And I think that the GPs of the fund were very intentional in how do we make sure we get, and we see enough candidates and enough applicants to source the best from different geos. And so what they did is they actually posted an open call for an investment partner, which again, never happens at a fund. Everything is usually behind closed doors, but they made it a really public application on Twitter. And then, they went through 400 applications, narrowed it down to 40 people, and then landed in the 11 partners, including themselves. So that's one thing. And at All Raise, we are actually very, very data driven. And I know we have talked about how there's lack of data, lack of transparency, et cetera. And so one of the things that All Raise wanted to do, and what we say internally, is that you can't measure or you can't move what you don't measure. And so we have a whole data team that really works on getting these numbers and publicizing them. So if you go to our website, allraise.org, there's a resources page, which every year we come up with a report about what does venture capital look like. And then we hold ourselves to the standard of how do we move the numbers. Because historically, we know that women-founded startups are actually more successful. They get closer to an exit than all male founding teams. And I think at All Raise, we have 3 hypotheses where we can change and move the needle for founders as well as funders by giving them access to 3 different things. So there's first access to other VCs or founders, because it's, again, all about relationships. The second is how to give them enough guidance and education so that they know what other founders know. So like offering more free events, bringing in these experts and making the events free. And then the last thing is support. Support is important because we believe that you need to have mentorship with your peers. So if you're a founder, you want to be with other founders who can give you guidance on how, how they were able to raise, or can walk you through what they did when they were in your situation. So it's creating more of these support groups so that you have a thought partner as you're going through some of these founder challenges. Awesome.
And yeah, Andres just as well, that there's some data on entrepreneurs for StartOut as well. I come from Catalyst and very much believe in the data. I think a lot of the points that you said, Melisssa, correspond with some of the things we heard from Cheryl as well around access, mentorship, et cetera. We got some really good questions, so I'm going to jump in on some of those. And I have a feeling this panel has a lot of really good responses here. And actually several of the questions revolve around this theme that we've talked about, which is access. And in particular, realizing that so much about this is who you know, right? Who your networks are. How do you recommend approaching, investors that can support you, especially those who are outside of the Bay Area, those in other geographical areas where capital isn't as highly distributed. And as a tackle-on question that I think is related, we talked about some of the differences in perception once you actually do talk to someone and you have that person's attention. And so how do you circumnavigate some of those potential stereotypes once you are sitting across from that investor? So how do you access people who can help you and give you capital? And how do you approach the conversation knowing that there might be more challenges when there are fewer people that look like you that are in the system?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, I can jump in here as as someone who had to do it. I am living proof it's possible. One of them is the good news is we have the internet, right? We are all more linked than we used to be, and so LinkedIn, is a powerful weapon. Right? Like, Bill, every person you meet, make sure you're connecting to them because they're connected to other people, and don't be afraid to ask. Again, it's likely that, for startup founders, you're going to have to knock on more doors, and you can now that that it's 50, start to make that list of who are the 50 people that I need to talk to and who knows them. FS6, AngelList, there's a bunch of, social networks that are just focused on connecting investors and entrepreneurs. So get in there. And then, once you're sitting at that table, at least for me, I try to research, as much as possible, well, who is this person and who are they, as a human being, right? What's their background? What's their story? With the person who ended up being our lead investor, Josh Mailman, who's amazing, we actually ended up, before he invested, sitting on a park bench for 2 hours, just talking about like our hopes, our dreams, our backgrounds, our families, because especially at that seed stage, the, investor, the angel or the fund manager, they're investing in you as the individual, like, because they know that you're going to pivot, your business is going to change, and they're investing in your ability to adapt and be smart and refine your business model into something that's successful. So, I think it's really just, crossing that bridge of human to human. Who are you? Reaching both heart and mind.
I would just double up on that. I mean, I think, the first time I raised money, there was no such thing as Twitter and IG. So it was really challenging. But I do think there are enough stories now, and you can do a Google search. I take any and every call that I get. I know there are several like Cheryl and others who are willing to take those phone calls and talk to people. I think there's also a lot of networks that have sprung up that are sometimes sector-based, like Black Women Talk Tech and some others that regularly, provide access to investors and other successful entrepreneurs, but also find a set of peers. But I really want to just quadruple exclamation points next to what Cheryl said, which is to get to know folks. These are not just investors, these are partners. And one of the greatest challenges I have, particularly for Black entrepreneurs, is that if we start too soon and we don't understand how to manage our cap table, by round 2 or 3, we are almost nowhere to be seen on that cap table. And so it's really important that you get to know your investors and know that they share the vision, they share the mission, they're going to support you. They're going to ask good questions, they're going to help make contacts, but it's someone that you actually like and want to spend a lot of time with, because they don't go away. Unless the business goes away, they don't go away. So I think, I cannot emphasize enough, I know Josh very well. And so the park bench, in Zoom, have a couple of just Zoom calls. But I would also say, they do diligence on us as entrepreneurs, do diligence on them. Look at AngelList, look at Signal. look at PitchBook and call other entrepreneurs that they've worked with and said, hey, what are they like? You know, are they nice? Do they get along? Are they constructive, or are they antagonistic? You know, I would argue probably want to do more than you probably would for your first date, but you know, this is a much more restrictive and legally bound relationship than a date. So I would say definitely invest.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, Signal and others are super, super helpful. And it kind of changes the dynamic, right? It's like you're choosing them as well. And it all sounds like some kind of basic dating advice, but these are such important long-term partnerships. We have time for one more question. I want to make a quick comment first and just second what Cheryl said to you, Jessica. Jessica, you talked about having doors, you know, slammed in your face, being a trans woman, and you know, it takes me back to that, you know, what we were sharing in the and Melissa Bradley, you spoke about this, like, you aren't the person we want to be the face of this organization, which I've heard from many women, many intersectional women who are raising, which is just appalling. And so, yeah, like, do I want to work with you? I think it empowers the entrepreneur. This last question I want to ask is just, you know, we are in this virtual environment. And Peter asked, you know, has the current virtual environment improved fundraising in terms of diversity now that we're all we're not on Sand Hill Road, you know, we are all in a virtual milieu. Any thoughts?
I'll take that one. I actually think that it's been worse for women and underrepresented people because many women, we've had to take a step back in our work in order to support more childcare because kids are not in school, and so by default the responsibility comes to the woman's shoulders. So it's held us back a little bit more in where our business could have progressed. And I don't know that that's being talked about how many women-led businesses are on hold right now because of COVID. And so I'm a part of a lot of women founder groups, and there's conversations about that. Like a lot of us has had to put our businesses on hold. So I do not think that it's actually a good thing. I also know that for investors to write big checks, they like to meet a person in real life. And so now a lot of these conversations are being done over Zoom, which hinders the real relationship building. So LPs and other investors may write checks more slowly. So what was already hard for women to raise funds, it has become double as hard because we can't meet in person. So those are just like my two takes on that.
Powerful. Thank you. I realize we're pretty much at the end of our time here, which is, I feel, came way too soon. But Melissa Bradley, Cheryl, you have been absolutely fantastic. And we really thank you for such insight. I'm going to be following up with all of you as well. And I hope some of the practical information in the chat was helpful as well. And also just, Erica, are there any final kind of closing words I need to share? I know that we have a 15-minute break, I believe, right now, and then we'll be coming back into the main session. Anything else?
That is correct. We do have a 15-minute break. You guys were awesome. There was such a wealth of knowledge that was shared here today. I was taking notes myself. It is just amazing how you guys have been able to persevere through everything. And I'm definitely going to order that book off Amazon just so that I can keep up with what's going on. But you guys are amazing representative to what we need to do to go ahead and be successful in this climate. That's awesome. Candice, you're an awesome moderator. Did a very great job.
Thank you. Thanks. So we'll see you all.
Ups to Candice. Thank you so much, Candice. This was amazing.
Thank you. We all have to talk again. All
Thank
right, everyone.
you. Bye, everyone.
See you.